Hello students, I hope everyone is well. Here we are nearing the end of the semester, the end of the year, how exciting. And we're in our second to last module in Biology 2. It's called the urinary system. This is one of my favorite modules. I know I probably said that a million times, but I really love the urinary system. And I hope by the time we get to the end of it, you will see all the fabulous features and you will be impressed very much as well. Especially, we don't even have to think about our urinary system. That's working usually beautifully. So let's get into it. We're going to have a opening introductory video.
It's a hot day, and you've just downed several glasses of water, one after the other. Behind the sudden urge that follows are two bean-shaped organs that work as fine-tuned internal sensors. They balance the amount of fluid in your body, detect waste in your blood, and know when to release the vitamins, minerals, and hormones you need to stay alive. Say hello to your kidneys. The main role of these organs is to dispose of waste products and to turn them into urine. The body's 8 liters of blood pass through the kidneys between 20 and 25 times each day, meaning that together, these organs filter about 180 liters every 24 hours. The ingredients in your blood are constantly changing as you ingest food and drink, which explains why the kidneys need to be on permanent duty. Blood enters each kidney through arteries that branch and branch until they form tiny vessels that entwine with special internal modules called nephrons. In each kidney, 1 million of these nephrons form a powerful array of filters and sensors that carefully sift through the blood. This is where we see just how refined and accurate this internal sensing system is. To filter the blood, each nephron uses 2 powerful pieces of equipment, a blob-like structure called a glomerulus, and a long stringy straw-like tubule. The glomerulus works like a sieve, allowing only certain ingredients, such as vitamins and minerals, to pass into the tubule. Then, this vessel's job is to detect whether any of those ingredients are needed in the body. If so, they're reabsorbed in amounts that the body needs so they can circulate in the blood again. But the blood doesn't only carry useful ingredients. It contains waste products too, and the nephrons have to figure out what to do with them. The tubules sense compounds the body doesn't need, like urea, left over from the breakdown of proteins, and redirects them as urine out of the kidneys and through 2 long sewers called ureters. These tubes empty their contents into the bladder to be discharged, ridding your body of that waste once and for all. There's water in that urine too. If the kidney detects too much of it in your blood, for instance, when you've chugged several glasses at once, it sends the extra liquid to the bladder to be removed. On the other hand, low water levels in the blood prompt the kidney to release some back into the bloodstream, meaning that less water makes it into the urine. This is why urine appears yellower when you're less hydrated. By controlling water, your kidneys stabilize the body's fluid levels. But this fine balancing act isn't the kidney's only skill. These organs have the power to activate vitamin D to secrete a hormone called renin that raises blood pressure, and another hormone called erythropoietin, which increases red blood cell production. Without the kidneys, our bodily fluids would spiral out of control. Every time we ate, our blood would receive another load of unsifted ingredients. Soon, the buildup of waste would overload our systems and we'd expire. So each kidney not only keeps things running smoothly, it also keeps us alive. Lucky then that we have 2 of these magical beans.
Okay, I thought that was an excellent overview of the system. It's general, but it's got a lot of great information. We're going to get a little more detail now, okay? All right, so we're going to be looking at the function. What is the function of the urinary system? So down here you can see that it's the main excretion system of the body. It's the primary means by which toxins are removed from the body, okay? So we probably already knew that, right? It's going to get the stuff we don't need. It's some of the byproducts of cellular activity we need to get rid of those. Urea is the main thing like that. That's where we get the name urine. And so we're just going to get those out of the body. So the kidneys are basically the gatekeepers for what stays in and what gets out in a liquid form in the body, okay? So its number one function is to make urine. Okay, that makes sense, right? It's going to manufacture that by filtering the blood and taking the bad stuff out. All right, another thing is it's going to be the main controller of pH, and namely the pH level of the blood. It turns out the pH level of the blood has a very, very narrow range. It has to stay within a range, and we're going to see how it can get very bad if it gets out of that range. And so the kidneys can measure how much acidity is in our blood. If is it too acidic or is it not acidic enough? Remember, pH has to do with the amount of hydrogen ions are in the blood, and that would be the amount of acid. And if we need to make that acid less, we need to raise our pH up a little bit. The kidneys know that, and they have these different functions that they can employ to do that. It's pretty fascinating. The regulation of blood pressure. Now, this makes sense since all the blood's coming into the kidneys like that. We're going to see how blood pressure plays an important role in the actual filtration process. But also, the kidneys can tell if the blood pressure is in trouble. If the blood pressure is very low, for instance, it will make some changes. If the blood pressure is very high, it could cause damage and this kind of stuff. But the kidneys can recognize the blood pressure and do some things to help regulate it. We'll get to that. The stimulation of erythropoiesis, if you remember that correctly, it means to make more red blood cells. Sometimes, so the kidneys can tell, are we anemic? The kidneys can tell if we have low oxygen levels, and therefore to increase our red blood cell count so we can get some more oxygen and some more blood into the system. All right, the activation of vitamin D. Remember, vitamin D is something that is made often in the gut area, and then our skin, it gets converted, and then it can be activated because the kidneys will recognize it. And that vitamin D, the activated vitamin D, will cause the release of certain hormones, namely renin, and we'll get to that in a minute. All right, and then we have transport, storage, and release. So it transports it from the kidneys down through the ureters into the bladder where it is stored, and then later, when we are ready, we can release the urine through the bladder, through the urethra. And fortunately, we have control of that. Yeah, okay. Electrolytes turn out that they're very important in our body. The main electrolytes we'll be discussing, there are others, but there are these main ones: calcium, potassium, sodium, chlorine, and magnesium. Okay, so why are electrolytes so important? Well, we know some of it, like it says up here at the top, the support of the nervous system. Remember the sodium-potassium pump and getting a action potential going down through the body. So that's important right there, and that brings us to the supporting of the muscle contraction, right? We need the muscle to be contracted because we can have that calcium will open that door so that the sodium-potassium pump can do its little switcheroo and cause a contraction to take place. So that's pretty cool stuff. Also, keeping hydrated. Salt will make us thirsty, right? So we can drink more water, or we'll want to drink more water. And then right here we see participating in pH balance. Notice it's kind of pointing to the area where the kidneys are. And we're going to see, we mentioned pH already, we're going to see in a little more detail in a minute how the pH levels can be manipulated. Okay, so but it just is important to know that these electrolytes are so important to us. We need to get these as nutrients, from our food. Sometimes if you've had a medical issue, they might give you what are known as lights. Lights would be a type of fluid that they put into your arm through an IV catheter, and that's going to replace some of maybe lost electrolytes if you've had some sort of issue. Okay, we can find our two kidneys situated in the retroperitoneal cavity. Let's take that word apart. Peritoneal, remember that's our abdominal cavity. It's below the muscle called the diaphragm, which is keeps our lungs in a vacuum seal up in there. And then down below we have all those other organs sort of floating around inside of our abdominal cavity called the peritoneal cavity. Retro means back. So at the back of the peritoneal cavity, we will find the two kidneys nestled snugly back there. You can see in the picture how close they are to the spine. All right, so they're kind of sitting right in here in your back. One is a little bit lower than the other. If you've ever known anybody who's had kidney trouble or kidney stones or something like that, it will present as a pain in the lower back. I mean, a very, severe pain in their lower back. But we have them in there to be protected. So they are snuggled in there. They are covered with a layer of adipose. Remember, that's fatty tissue. Even very thin people or people who have malnutrition have fat that covers their kidneys. And that's because they need to stay in place. And why is it so important that they stay in place? They need to be protected from movement, from muscle action. And mainly it has to do with, we don't want to damage the tissue, obviously, but there's this tube coming out here, right, called the ureter. And we don't want that ureter to get kinked in any way. If the kidney were to drop down, it might kink that a little tubule, and that would cause the urine to build up inside the kidney, which would be a very serious problem. So we need to stop that from happening. You don't want your kidney to get really large because of a backup of urine. I've known people that have had that problem, and it's painful, and sometimes you end up losing a kidney that way. So, all right, so you may want to draw this. This is the anatomy of the kidney. This is example 15.2 in your book, okay? So if you want to pause the video here and draw this, you may go ahead and do that. So what we have is basically a kidney shape, okay? Things that are kidney shaped like a kidney bean are named after the kidney. And I want you to see we have the outer part here called the cortex and the inner part called the medulla. Remember the medulla, think of middle. We've had other things like that, right? And so we're going to see how the cortex right here, the blood comes in all the way up to the cortex, and it goes through the filtration process, starts up here, okay, and then it goes down through these things called the renal. If we hear the word renal, that means having to do with the kidney. The renal pyramids right here, okay, they act kind of like the beginning, the blood part of the funnel, turning into this area here, which will become the funnel to the ureter, okay. And so it's interesting how in the cortex and medulla, the tissue is quite different in the ion content. So right here we have certain amount of ions, but down here they get more and more concentrated. And I'm going to put it this way, the inner part of the kidney is salty. Okay, that's a way of saying it's salty. It's mostly because it has those ions that are in there. Okay, and we're going to see the details as the nephron comes down through here, sorry about that, through here, how the process of the filtering goes right in through here, and then the filtrate ends up in this white tissue here that will become the urine. So filtrate would be the urine. Okay, so go ahead and draw that and label all those parts. Okay, here we're going to look at the external anatomy up here, and then the internal anatomy down here. We're just going to a little more fun facts here, a little more detail. Each kidney is encased in a serous membrane called the visceral peritoneum. So, remember, it's a serous membrane. If you remember back in our membrane discussion, that means it's going to be over the top of it. You can see this kind of gray covering over the top of it right here, okay? And it's pretty slippery. That's so that it can stay input. Remember, we don't want any movement, but if there is any movement at all, there won't be any friction causing any problems on the actual kidney itself. Most of the organs do have some sort of visceral covering like that. The outer layer is called the capsule, okay? So that's the outer layer just underneath the peritoneum. It's called renal capsule. Remember, renal kidney. The interior is split into the cortex and the medulla. I mentioned that earlier and talked about how the medulla in the middle has kind of a salty feature to it. And the cortex is where the blood gets first, interestingly, all the way through up there and then down through. Here we go. The blood supply reaches to the cortex where it begins the filtration process. And it continues through the medulla where the renal pyramids, you saw that in the last picture, excuse me, act like a funnel, and into the renal pelvis, and the renal pelvis would be that calyx right there, and it comes into it, okay? And the collected urine then is funneled by way of the ureter to the bladder. All right. Erythropoiesis, you remember that, that's the manufacture of red blood cells, and this is how the kidneys work to detect a need for red blood cells. What would be the need? If we have a low red blood cell count, or it says it right here, if there's a drop in blood oxygen, right? The red blood cells are carrying the oxygen. So we can see here, that's called hypoxia. So the kidney will recognize hypoxia, low oxygen in the blood, and then it will release, it will cause the secretion of the erythropoietin, which will promote red blood cell manufacture in the red marrow of the lung bones. Yeah, you remember that part, right? And so then we can then restore the amount of oxygen that is more, brings us back into the balance. It's all about the balance right there. So it's the kidneys can recognize that. Pretty cool. Okay, the main, function would be urine formation. So let's see the steps of urine formation, okay? So we have 4 steps. Here we go. 1, we have filtration. We know that about filtering the blood and getting all the junk out of it. We have reabsorption, because anything that went out that we might need to bring back in, namely water, will be brought back in. And secretion will be bigger things being brought back in. We'll get to the details here in a minute. And then we have the reabsorption of water. At the very end of the process, the kidneys decide, do I need more water or do I need to get rid of water? Okay, so whichever one, the kidney will make the decision, and it's quite fascinating how it is able to do that. It's sort of got its own little, process to measure how much water we need. The old book used to put it this way, that urine formation, these 4 steps, kind of represent cleaning a junk drawer. If you have a junk drawer at your house, you know how it gets, kind of unruly at sometimes. I have more than one junk drawer at my house. And so when it comes time to clean it, because, there's just too much junk in there, really the easiest way to do that is just dump the whole drawer out, right? So that's kind of what's happening here. All of the blood is just dumping the entire liquid portion of the blood out and then bringing things back in that we need. Okay, so just like your junk drawer, you're going to bring things in. And so we're going to see each step of the process here. All right, so this brings us to this beautifully designed apparatus in our body called the nephron. Boy, howdy, it is a beautiful thing. A kidney doctor, by the way, is known as a nephrologist because it's based on this functional unit, the thing that actually does the filtering, the nephron. Each kidney has approximately 1.3 million nephrons. That's a lot. Like I said before, they're not really visible. We have tried doing the dissection before of a kidney, and it's fairly unremarkable, sadly, because you can't really see because the nephrons are so small. They begin in the cortex, right? That's where the blood goes. You can see the blood vessel right up here in the cortex going into this little part here called the Bowman's capsule. We'll get to that. And then it releases, and it finally gets down to where it can take it to the collecting duct, to the ureter, to the bladder. So the blood is concentrated in the renal corpuscle. We'll get to that. A specialized receptacle called the Bowman's capsule, we're going to draw this in a minute, y'all, right there, receives the blood at high blood pressure. That's important. And the filtrate is what is going to become urine. Okay, so the filtrate is the liquid portion of the blood that goes out. All right, enters the nephron and proceeds to the collecting duct as needed. Okay, so now we're going to think about, where is the stuff? Is the stuff we're talking about, whether it's ions or water or glucose or whatever it is it in the blood or is it in the nephron? If it's in the blood, it's called blood. If it's in the nephron, it's called filtrate, eventually to be called urine. Okay? All right, so here we're going to draw a nephron. I don't really have the ability to draw while I'm talking to you, so I did a little recording. So I'm going to go ahead and start it, and then we're going to see about how it goes here, okay? So this was my little pen. I'm not very good at it, but I'd like you to draw this. This is an important thing we need to do. So I started over here with the Bowman's capsule. All right, it's really more like a tennis ball with a hole in it, okay? Then we have our tube going downward. There's our little loop. And then our ending tube right here called the distal tubule. We'll get to that. And then back up to the Bowman's capsule. We're going to finish our, so remember that's a little tube, like a little straw, like a crazy straw, okay? All right, and here we come to the collecting duct right there. Okay, and we're going to get our blood vessel coming in now. Here it comes, nice red blood vessel. It goes inside. Remember, it's more like a tennis ball with a hole in it, but I'm cutting away the side there. Comes back out, and that is called the glomerulus, okay? So whenever you're going to draw, make sure to label. I would expect that glomerulus. All right, my writing's not very pretty here either. And then we have the Bowman's capsule, named after Dr. Bowman. We're going to get to some details on it in just a minute. And then the first set here is called the proximal, which means close. The proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, I just put tubule here. Convoluted means it's, it's wavy. And then down here, reaching deep down into the medulla, would be called the loop of Henle, named after Dr. Henle. And then the distal, being distant, distal convoluted tubule. Okay, and then the collecting duct. All right, so I will tell you that not every nephron has the loop of Henle or a very long loop of Henle. Some of them are shorter, some of them don't have it. And that's because they don't eat it, you know. So the loop of Henle is going to be reaching down into that very salty area of the kidney so that we can see the exchange right there that's going on of the water and that kind of thing. Okay. All right, so be sure to draw that and label it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things to label. I would put that on a quiz or a test. So, okay, so now our renal terms. The filtrate, the liquid part of the blood, remember, is called plasma. Some small proteins. That filtrate goes in and into the nephron now. I just don't want you to be confused about bloodstream versus filtrate, okay? Then we have our renal blood flow rate. That's the rate that the blood flows through the kidneys. It needs to be going pretty fast and pretty high pressure. Our glomerular filtration rate, the rate at which the filtrate is processed through the glomerulus. Okay, so it's kind of slamming into it there. And our tube maximum, our tubular maximum would be the rate of reabsorption by active transport through the tubules of the nephron. Just like anything else, if I overload something, I might run out of little transport, processes, ways, and so I might overwhelm it just a little bit. So sometimes we have to be careful that way. Okay, so here is our Bowman's capsule. You can see the blood coming in. I will tell you the afferent arteriole here coming in is bigger than the efferent one coming out. Therefore, there's a little bit of a backup in here, right, causing that pressure to increase even more. And the whole blood comes and slams against the capsule wall right in here, okay? There's a little more structure inside there we'll get to in just a minute. But as it slams through there, it pushes all of the liquid portion of the blood into the nephron, okay? It goes into the nephron. Here's the beginning of that proximal tubule right here. And as it slams into there and goes through there, think about, a fire hose, and if I spray it pretty high level into a very, very secure screen, all the water will go through, right? It'll all go through, yeah, because it's under a lot of pressure and it's going through the sieve that is the right size for water to fit through it. Yeah, okay, so that's what's happening here. But it's big things can't go through it. Large red blood cells, large white blood cells, large proteins cannot make it through there, unless, of course, there's damage, which we will get to. Okay, so our filtration deal, here we go. The filtration begins in the Bowman's capsule. The blood's under high blood pressure, enters the glomerulus. The afferent vessel, that's what I mentioned to you, is larger. Therefore, it kind of increases the pressure by backing things up a little bit. This is known as glomerular capillary pressure, okay, and it needs to be high. If you lose a lot of blood or something like that, then your kidneys will suffer because they don't have enough pressure to push things through. So we definitely need the pressure in there. There are these holes in the glomerulus called fenestrae. It just makes glomerulus highly porous. It makes it easy for the liquid to get out, okay? It's not being held in there tightly. The holes are not big enough for blood cells and large proteins to go through, however. Look at this. All the liquid portion of the blood moves through the blood vessel into the Bowman's capsule. Remember the junk drawer. We're going to dump everything into it. So the red blood cells and stuff would be like if I'm dumping the junk drawer out, but I know I want to keep the stapler in there. I just kind of hold on to the stapler in the drawer, dump everything out, stapler still in. You get that? Yeah. That would be my red cells and stuff. They stayed over there in that, okay? Everything else went out. Now it is called filtrate. And we have these specialized cells in the Bowman's capsule called podocytes. They keep it in, it's like a net, really, that keeps the glomerulus in place so it doesn't, flop around inside of there. It's very beautifully designed. The membrane of the Bowman's capsule is also highly permeable. It lets everything pass through pretty easily. Not a whole lot of regulation right there. In fact, some things go through there and we want to get them back in pretty quickly, namely water, right? We want to get back in really quickly. We have the glomerular filtration rate, which can be measured. It's about 125 milliliters per minute, or like the video said at the beginning, 180 liters a day. Wow, that's a lot of work going on there. Our kidneys are in constantly working, and doing a beautiful job of keeping our blood clean. I'm going to put it that way, clean, right? So if we have increased blood pressure, then there will be an increased permeability of the Bowman's capsule membrane. So a high glomerular filtration rate is actually good for that. Sometimes the blood pressure will increase in order to get a higher permeability of the capsule membrane. Okay, so that's step one, the steps of filtration right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. Okay. So you can see here the afferent is high pressure. It's bigger than the efferent, so that increases the pressure even more because it can't get out as quickly. It slams against the side of this, right, all the way around in a globe style, and it makes this filtrate that goes out, okay? And as it gets into the beginning proximal convoluted tubule, it will immediately the water will go back into the blood. Because you think about it, if all the water's out of the blood, that's kind of strange blood, isn't it? You know, with the red cells and the white cells and the large proteins with no liquid portion, kind of weird. It's going to go immediately back into it by the process of osmosis. Okay, so reabsorption, that's what this is. Most of this step takes place in the proximal convoluted tubule, that's closest to the Bowman's capsule. 65% of the water is reabsorbed here passively. That just means because of the dictates of osmosis, there's no water there, the water will go in automatically. Look at this, y'all. 100% of the glucose is reabsorbed. Now, notice it has to be reabsorbed actively, meaning that we do need ATP for this, right? We do need an active process. So our whole process of respiration, making the ATP, must be in good working order. And if 100% of the glucose is reabsorbed into the bloodstream, how much is left in the filtrate? Yeah, 0, right? So there should be 0 glucose in your urine. If there's glucose in your urine, there is a problem. Okay, we remember the study of diabetes, right? When a doctor would measure urine glucose levels, and it should be about 0, and somebody with diabetes, they have all of their insulin receptors filled up or something like this, and they don't the glucose can't go in where it needs to go, so it ends up in the urine. So it will go out, right? We call that spilling glucose into the urine. Then we have active reabsorption, also requiring a carrier and ATP. In addition to glucose, it's used to absorb small proteins. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, vitamins, minerals, anything else that may have slipped through that the body still needs. Now, it's easy to get the minerals back in because they're small. Vitamins are a little larger. It just depends on what we need, and the kidney gets to decide what it is. We have a tubular maximum, or a Tmax, can occur when all the carriers are occupied. That's similar to in the diabetes situation. If I've got don't have enough, carriers, or they're all filled. Like, remember the dance? We're at the dance and everybody's dancing. I don't have any partners available. That leaves the glucose that can't be reabsorbed at that time, right? So it'll just be spilled in the urine. Okay, step 3, secretion. Because the water is so easily reabsorbed in the proximal tubule, sometime the ions will follow it back into the blood, okay? So now the blood's like, oh, I just got rid of you. I have to get you out again, all right? So that'll take place in a secretory way, okay? So secretion. When you see secretion, you think it's going to be needing ATP, right? It's going to be an active transport. So that takes place in the distal convoluted tubule. That's the one that's farther away. Other wastes, including looks like potassium and hydrogen ions, will get transported back into the blood. All right, and so we'll see this. I'm not crazy about this picture. You can see the glomerulus here. Remember, so it slams in, everything goes in here, and then this should kind of come wrap around this part here where all the water goes back in. Then we're going to see how, as the loop of Henle goes down, all this blood supply, this crazy stuff going on right here, where we're going to have absorption, reabsorption, get rid of stuff, and then coming back up, and then we're going to see the distal tubule at the end there. We'll make the final decision of what's going to stay and what's going to go. All right, the reabsorption of water. We're going to be looking at the loop of Henle, okay? That's that loop that reaches deep down into the salty medulla of the kidney right there. So as the loop is going down, we call that the descending loop of Henle. It is completely permeable to water. Therefore, the water can easily flow out back into the blood or stay in, right? It can go wherever the dictates of osmosis will take it. The urea is going to travel into the nephron. That's kind of the salty stuff. It's going to go into the nephron. We want to get urea out of the body, so into the filtrate, which is the nephron, right? Now, this is interesting. In fact, it's kind of a miracle, okay? Because the ascending loop of Henle, as it starts to go up, back up toward the distal convoluted tubule, it is impermeable to water, all right? So water has to stay in the nephron at this point. All right, none of it's going to come in or go out. All other solutes as well. So H2O, now water, will stay in the nephron, but ions are actively put back into the blood in this area. So ions are going to be taken across the gradient out of the nephron into the blood through an active transport process. Needs ATP. Okay. Meanwhile, the concentrations of solutes in the interstitial fluid of the tissues, in other words, in the medulla, they change from the cortex to the medulla. The concentration increases deep in the medulla, salty, right? Urea is one of those causing that saltiness, quote unquote. The filtrate, which is in the nephron, I keep trying to emphasize that. I don't want you to confuse between what's in the blood vessel and what's in the nephron vessel. Okay. The filtrate will reach the distal tubule, and the interstitial solute concentration is low. Okay, interstitials in the cells around in that side of that kidney. Water did not follow the electrolytes, right, because they couldn't, because it was impermeable in that part of the loop of Henle. They'll be pumped out. Okay, so water can now go into the blood if it's needed. This is controlled by the hormone ADH, the antidiuretic hormone. We talked about that in the that unit, right? Couple of modules ago. Now, check this out. The ADH will make the distal tubule and the collecting duct permeable to water. What? So depending on that, if that hormone is present, the distal tubule and collecting duct will either be permeable to water or impermeable. It depends. What does my body need? Okay? So if I drink a whole lot of water, then my distal tubule will keep that water in the nephron. Okay, so it'll be non-permeable to water, and the collecting duct as well, so that water goes into my urine, and you'll have a very dilute urine, a very light yellow colored urine. Meanwhile, if I haven't had enough to drink, then the distal tubule will know it, and it'll say, hold the phone, we need to keep this water in the body, and so therefore the water will come out of the filtrate back into the bloodstream, causing me to have a more concentrated urine. So the urine would be very dark yellow. So if you've ever, urinated and it's very, very dark yellow, you might think, wow, I probably need to drink some water. I'm a little bit dehydrated here. That is an indicator of that. When the body has too much water, the ADH is low. Therefore, we have lots of light-colored urine. When the body's dehydrated, ADH is released and the kidneys keep the H2O. All right? We have more concentrated urine. Super cool right there. I mean, the fact that distal tubule and that collecting duct can detect whether or not it needs to be permeable or not is pretty miraculous stuff, y'all. Okay, so here's kind of a picture of it. We've straightened out our nephron somewhat here. So we see in the cortex area, see the proximal and distal tubules are all in the cortex area. So is the Bowman's capsule, okay. But as it reaches down, we're going to see it's getting really concentrated here. These numbers, 400, 900, 1200, that's the concentration of ions right there. We know that the descending loop of Henle is water permeable. Look, all that water, boom, 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 going back into the tissues, going back into the bloodstream. Remember, there's a blood vessel surrounding all of this, right? Very closely associated with it. We've taken it out for the, ability to see better. Okay, so as it goes back up right here, the water's going to stay in now, but we're going to have active transport. It says sodium chloride right here, but other ions as well will be taken out there. And then when we get to the distal convoluted tubule right here, it's going to make that decision whether we're going to leave water in the bloodstream or put water into the urine, okay? Super cool, super cool. Now here comes some of the anatomy part here. The tissue of the bladder is made of transitional squamous epithelium. If you remember all the way back to module 2, it's squamous, so that's going to be squatty, but it's transitional. In other words, it looks, if it's not stretched out, it looks sort of like a columnar epithelium, but then it's stretchable, and then its ending stage is going to look squamous, all squatty like that. So it gives the ability of our bladder to enlarge and fill up with urine, and you know that feeling if you have a full bladder, right? It's getting really large there, and you need to empty it out. We have an internal urinary sphincter. It's like a valve for the urethra. It's controlled by the autonomic nervous system, and therefore it's involuntary. So The kidney's making the urine. It's coming down, trickling down through the ureters, and that urinary sphincter, the internal sphincter, is going to open and let it into the bladder, okay? And that's happening while you're not even thinking about it. It's happening this moment, okay? So then, fortunately, there is an external urinary sphincter, and it's controlled by, yay, voluntary muscles. It can remain closed even when the internal sphincter is open, letting urine in there, and we have to have a conscious effort to empty our bladder and to open that external sphincter. Okay. Now, you remember we talked about with little babies. Well, maybe we haven't. Have we talked about how that the nerves to innervate the bladder and these sphincters right here are some of the last things to develop in a developing baby. That's why little babies need diapers. Okay, they can't control their bladders until about, I'm going to say, between 18 months and 3 years old, maybe 4 years old. So if we cannot control the way the urine is leaving the body, we call that incontinence. And so sometimes there might be nerve damage, there might be disease, something like that. Sometimes elderly people lose that muscular control and have a little bit of incontinence, and therefore we have things called adult diapers. Yeah. Okay, so here's the bladder, ureter coming in and emptying about right here into that internal sphincter. All right, now that's the external sphincter right here is muscles right there. So it's going to squeeze that closed until I'm ready to relax. You basically have to relax to therefore squeeze and open those, relax to open those, and then the urine can leave the body. And therefore the stretchy bladder gets small again. Okay, so we're going to move to the physiology portion of the lecture, which is a little more complicated. If you are covering this module in 2 weeks, you can stop here and then come back and finish it the next time. But I'm going to continue on with the lecture here, the second half, the balance of water. We're going to be looking at pH as well and blood pressure control. Okay? Here we go. High blood pressure can harm your kidney. That makes sense because we know how that's coming in there, that Bowman's capsule. It's slamming against the filter inside there. And so, but if it's too high, you can see how it might break through some of those and cause some damage. So we see a little boxing match here. If it's too high, it could cause some damage to the kidney. All right, so how do we control blood pressure? Well, the kidneys are going to recognize it first off, and then we're going to see how it gets controlled here. Here we go. Let's say there's a drop in blood pressure. What would cause a drop in blood pressure? A severe cold. If you're getting, fall into a frozen lake, you're getting really cold. If you have a serious bleeding disorder, you've been in an accident and you have blood coming out of your body, that's going to cause a decrease in blood pressure, therefore a decrease in blood sodium, basically not as much blood, okay? Now that's detected, the sodium level is detected by these special cells near the glomerulus called juxtaglomerular cells. Okay, juxta means next to, okay, so juxtaglomerular cells, they will now, when they recognize this, remember, activated by vitamin D, they will release renin, which is a hormone. And it starts a cascade of biochemical events. Oh no, a cascade of biochemical events. It gets really complex if that's happening. Okay, so what happens? Well, there's vasoconstriction. That means the veins are going to get smaller. So if I'm putting liquid through a smaller area just by the dictates of pressure, right, it's going to increase the blood pressure. Okay, that's good. If I have increased blood pressure, I can get them through that Bowman's capsule more effectively. All right, number 2, it causes an increase in thirst. So if I'm thirsty, what am I going to do? I'm going to drink. And if I'm going to drink, I'm going to have more water in my system. That will also increase blood pressure. Wow. It causes, interestingly, an increase in salt cravings. You may have noticed if you've been out jogging and sweating a lot and you're like, oh man, I could use something salty, because your body needs it. Because if you get a little more salt, you eat something salty, you'll then therefore create more thirst in you. You'll then therefore drink more water, then therefore your blood pressure will increase. You get it? Pretty cool. Also, we have a hormone that gets released called aldosterone. It causes sodium to be reabsorbed. So if sodium's reabsorbed into the tissues, the water's going to want to follow that, right? So we're going to keep the water in. We're going to allow the blood pressure to increase just sheerly by the increase of the water presence there in the blood and in the tissues. All right, so look at this picture on the right here. What is blood pressure? We kind of know that already, but the blood comes, it hits the sides of the vessel, and it pushes against it, okay? So we know that's happening right there for blood pressure. Now, if that should drop, we're going to see here the high blood sodium or the low blood sodium. So we're going to try to achieve homeostasis, normal blood pressure. If the blood sodium is high, then we're going to see the ANH is going to be released, right? The atrial natriuretic. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. The hormone is going to come. The kidneys will excrete sodium and water into the urine to bring back down to homeostasis. If it's low, this is what we talked about just a second ago. The renin is going to come in here, and look, the adrenal cortex is even part of that, the aldosterone being secreted because it's a hormone, right? And then here we're going to see how it's going to have the sodium and water from the kidney tubules will reabsorb, and we have homeostasis. Okay, it's all about the balance, all trying to get there. I think we're going to get to that heart part here. Oh, let's watch this little video about this.
Healthy kidneys are essential for maintaining normal blood pressure. Each kidney has thousands of blood vessels responsible for filtering large amounts of blood. Over time, high blood pressure can cause these vessels to narrow, weaken, or harden. This damage then prevents the vessels from delivering enough blood to the kidney's nephrons, which keep the body's fluids and nutrients in balance. Each nephron receives its blood supply through the glomerulus, a ball of tiny filtering vessels. When the glomerulus loses its blood supply, then the filtering process slows down. This leads to a buildup of toxins in the blood, while important nutrients like protein are lost in the urine. This is the start of a vicious cycle in which blood pressure becomes harder to control and kidneys become more damaged and eventually stop working completely. This process occurs over the course of several years, but can be prevented with proper care. For more information, please visit.
Okay, so that kind of lends to the idea of that the blood pressure, high blood pressure, is sort of the silent killer, if you will. Some people will have high blood pressure and not even know it. The symptoms are kind of, not very plain. Mostly you can find out by doing a blood pressure test, right, on your arm. You've probably seen that done before. Okay, so this is the part about the heart. That was the upper part of that picture I was showing you. So it turns out that the heart also knows if the blood pressure is a problem, okay? So if I have a high blood volume, there's a lot of blood, it'll increase the pressure. That makes sense, right? If there's more of it, there'll be more to push around. And the right atrium of the heart stretches more, and it recognizes that, okay? So then it causes the release of the atrial natriuretic peptide, okay? That's going to go and affect now it's going to tell the kidneys that, okay? So it causes inhibition of sodium reabsorption so that will increase urine output, all right? So I'll get more urine out. I'll get more fluid out of my body, all right? And so that'll help to mitigate that problem. This decreases blood volume, therefore blood pressure, okay? So we see here the ANP will affect, it'll cause vasodilation. Now, vasodilation is that the vessels are going to get larger, and if they get larger, that will lower pressure, right? And then we'll have an increased urine output with water elimination, decreased blood volume, therefore decreased blood pressure. Pretty beautiful. So it's another fail-safe against a blood pressure problem. But like the video said, if we have high blood pressure and we have to do this a lot, right, that over time it's just going to tax your organs more. So that's how high blood pressure can over time cause damage. So it's good to know to keep your blood pressure down. I think we talked about that in the heart unit and how there's good foods for that and stuff like that. Avoiding some foods, eating some foods type of thing. All right, so we have a high blood pressure, high volume of blood, atrial stretching in the heart, recognizes it, it releases the ANP. That'll lower the sodium absorption. That'll be a high urine production, the blood volume, and the blood pressure decrease. This is just kind of taking what it says right here and putting it into a little bit of a concise chart, if you will. Okay. All right, now we're going to be looking at the acid-base balance. Okay, this gets pretty complex as well. Okay, we want to make sure that our blood pH, the acidity of our blood, stays the same. All right, we want to stay balanced. We want to stay, as much as possible, no stressors, right? We don't want to be stressed. So let's see how the kidneys help with that. So let's check it out. Here we go. The pH of our blood is tightly controlled. Check it out. The pH, if it is below 7.35, it results in a condition called acidosis. Acidosis, if it goes on too long, will result in coma, which could result in, yikes, death. But if my pH is any higher than 7.45, oh my goodness, look how tight that is. It'll result in alkalosis that presents as seizures and could cause death. Oh my goodness gracious. Do you see now why pH balance is so crucial? All right, it's very important that we keep our pH safe. And you might be thinking, oh my goodness, how in the world am I going to keep my pH in the right balance? Don't worry. Don't worry. Your kidneys are going to take care of it for you. How in the world would I have a problem with my pH? Let's see. What causes it? So if you were sick and had excessive vomiting and diarrhea, remember in the digestive system module we talked about vomiting, which is a important function of the digestive system, right? We got to get some stuff out of there. But when I do that, I'll throw up all that acid that was in my stomach, all that hydrochloric acid. Therefore, I'll have less acid in my body, you see? So that could be a problem. Diarrhea, same deal. I'll be getting rid of a lot of possibly more alkaline things, and therefore it might cause the pH to go a little lower, and then if it's going to go back and forth between low and high. We have something called intestinal vomiting. It's similar, that it's just going to cause the secretion of things in the actual intestinal area. If my kidneys are failing, that makes sense, right? If my kidneys are failing, they're not going to be able to go through and do this balancing of the pH very well. And then respiratory distress, remember about in the respiratory unit, the tough one we just finished, that if I am increase my breathing rate, I'm going to be getting rid of the carbon dioxide more quickly, yes, and that's acidic, okay? So, or I could slow my rate and then keep the acidity in, all right? So that's ways that our respiratory distress can cause a change in pH. So notice these things are pretty, I think you'd kind of know, right? So if you are in generally in fairly good health, then you're not going to have to worry about any of these things right here. We do eat a lot of acidic things, but our body can handle that, okay? Some people say to drink alkaline water. I don't know how important that is. Our kidneys are pretty good about taking care of this problem. So it becomes an acidosis cycle right here. Remember acidosis right here. It says here we're just having poor digestion and stuff. We're eating a lot of acidic substances and our tissues can become more acidic. And then we're going to see how we have poor health and this kind of thing. So we really, really want our kidneys to work well in doing this. Okay, I don't believe that we can get into a serious acidosis just through diet. I think your kidneys are better than that. But one of the control systems, we have different control systems. One of them is a buffer system. We're going to look at that more specifically here in just a minute. It's just a way to neutralize action. This is acid, sorry. This is, our, volcano, right? Our little vinegar and baking soda volcano. We're just going to have a neutralization of the acid right there. It's pretty quick. But sometimes it's just quick and then not as effective. So we'll go into something else. I mentioned about the respiratory response. If we're breathing more, increased rate, we're going to get rid of some of that CO2, that acid in there, or we're going to slow it down. So our rate and depth of respirations are going to help with that. People have told you deep breathing exercises are good for you, right? That's all that. The muscular, the healthy for the lungs, and it's going to be healthy for our pH balance. And now let's look at our renal response. So that's what we're interested in here because we're looking at our kidneys. Look at here, the distal tubules, the distal convoluted tubules are sensitive to pH. So they'll basically test the pH of the filtrate in the nephron, okay? So the kidneys will begin to secrete hydrogen ions. That is something that indicates how much acidity there is. And they'll secrete it back into the nephron if the blood pH is falling. In other words, the blood pH is getting more acidic. We'll take some of those acidic ions, the H+, and put it in the nephron and get rid of it, okay? Causes the blood to become less acidic, therefore it's efficient. Sometimes it's a little slow, however. It's a little slow. But the kidneys are really, really good at that kind of thing. But let's take a little closer look at our buffer systems. There's three main ones. We have the bicarbonate buffer system, and basically we have a acid and a base working together. It is very important for our human blood to manage it. So we have carbonic acid, we have bicarbonate, basically baking soda right there, yeah. And it's respiratory system helps to kind of keep that regulated, as well as the kidneys. The kidneys know about it, right? So they know that this buffer system can be engaged. Then we have something known as a phosphate buffer system. It's actually inside the cells, in the fluids around the intracellular fluid, and in the renal nephron fluid as well. There's phosphate in there, which can be moved back and forth or something in order to bring in or get rid of hydrogen ions. And then we have our protein buffer system. That's things in the blood like hemoglobin, albumin, things like this. Those are some of those proteins. They're fairly large, and they can have a rapid buffered situation of the hydrogen ions, and they can take those and switch them and put them in a place where they won't be a problem. Okay, so those are our 3 buffer systems. Let's look at diseases of the urinary system. Okay, it turns out that a urinalysis, known as a UA, can be a very, very effective diagnostic tool. I don't know if you've ever had to give a urine sample. Here's a little picture of a cup up there where you go into the restroom and give a sample, and the doctor can look at it in several ways and tell all sorts of amazing things, okay? We can have hormone levels, look at those. We can see if there's any things that shouldn't be there. Remember, it's supposed to only be liquids, no red blood cells, no white blood cells, no proteins, large proteins, that is. And cells, there shouldn't be any cells in there, okay? So that can be seen in the urine and can be a diagnostic tool. So we will take those and test those with certain different testing things. We can find white cells, red cells, etc. Sometimes a stone can develop. There are minerals that usually in your diet, they'll start to crystallize, and they can crystallize inside a nephron, inside a kidney, and they can get rather large. They're usually found in the renal pelvis area. That's where all those, the collecting duct is about to begin. It's right there inside the kidney itself. They can migrate to the ureters and into the bladder, and they become a bladder stone at that point. We have certain treatments now that we can use to use ultrasonic therapy, where we put you down into like a tub and let the water sort of vibrate around you, and it can break up those little stones. Okay, but sometimes they're bad enough that you need to have surgery. If you've ever known anybody who had a kidney stone, it's a massively painful thing, and they're right in the lower part of your back, and it's super painful, right? And so no fun having a kidney stone. I've never had one, fortunately. Pyelonephritis is an infection of the kidney. Pyelo means referring to pus, and so an infection of the kidney, the white blood cells, go there and they die and that kind of thing. It can cause fever because you have an infection, severe back pain, nausea, vomiting sometimes just because you feel so badly. If it's left untreated, it can cause kidney damage, because think about it, the kidney gets filled up with pus, right? It can't do its job very well. And if you get into a severe infection, just like any infection, if it's untreated, sometimes they might self-resolve, but generally an infection, you're going to want an antibiotic and possibly fluids, to get lots of fluids running through your body, get that, kind of clear out those kidneys like that. All right, speaking of that, we have something called rhabdomyolysis. It's a weird condition that can develop when damaged muscle tissue enters the bloodstream. It'll clog up the renal corpuscle. That's the part inside the Bowman's capsule. Intense fluids would be required here. So what happens here, I'm going to show you a little kind of animation of how this works, is that if there's tissue damage in your muscle, sometimes that muscle can break off little pieces, and they'll end up in the bloodstream and end up therefore in the glomerulus, and therefore kind of could clog it up a little bit. I had a friend, an elderly man, who his daughter, they came to our church, and his daughter was one of my friends, and she came to church, and then she was wondering why her dad wasn't there. Why wasn't he there yet? So finally she went home, and she found him. He had slipped and fallen in the shower, and he was unable to move. So he's laying there for, I'm talking, I'm going to say an hour or so, and the cold water was on him because the shower's hot water had run out. So he's had cold water running on him. He's laying there in one position, can't move, and there was tissue damage to the part of his body that was touching the bottom of the tub, so his legs or something like that, and the damage from that caused this rhabdomyolysis. Okay, and it caused him to go into kidney failure. So not only did he have, I think he may have broken a bone too. Not only was he injured from the fall, now his kidneys were starting to act up. So watch this little thing here. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the first one. This is going to show This is a normal capillary glomerulus right here, and everything, all the big stuff is staying in it, and then the filtrate is going out. If there's damage, we can have red blood cells, white blood cells. That's called hematuria. Proteins, that's called proteinuria. I can see all of that in the urinalysis. Okay, the next picture is the rhabdomyolysis. Here's my muscle, it gets damaged. It sends it to the kidney. Yikes, okay? So muscle tissue breakdown, smack to the kidney, and then I'm going to watch it one more time. Watch the kidney. It's when it's healthy, it's releasing yellow urine. And now, oh no, I got cells, I've got blood and all that kind of stuff in there. Dark reddish brown urine. And so you just need lots and lots of fluids in order to kind of clear out your kidney like that. Okay, here's one of the ways to diagnose certain things. This is a urinary test strip. You can see somebody here, they've dipped this into the urine and then they compare it to a chart here that tells us levels of certain things. So if the urinalysis is normal, you would have 0 protein, 0 glucose, 0 red cells, 0 white cells, that kind of thing. You might have a certain level of, other things that are normal in there. I can't read everything along the side here, but I used to do this with dogs all the time at the veterinary clinic, and we would take the urine sample and do that. But then again, you can also take the urine. If the urine looks really clear yellow, that's a good indication that things are pretty good. But if it's not as clear, if it's kind of cloudy looking, what we do then, and we do it even if it's clear, but we'll take it and put it into a test tube and put it into a centrifuge, and if there's anything solid in there, it will go to the bottom of the tube. So I dump off the supernatant and I look at the sediment and I look at it under the microscope and I might see something along these lines. So these are different crystals that can form, and when they end up in the urine, it can help us diagnose some problems. I can't remember exactly, the shape of the crystal is very distinctive, right? These are very distinctive for various different things. For instance, one time we had an animal came in, it was just sick, and nobody knew exactly what was wrong with it. It was throwing up, it was just sick as a dog, right? This dog was sick as a dog. We got a urine sample and I tested it and I found some crystals. I feel like I remember them looking like this, but those crystals indicated specifically a certain kind of a poison that is found in antifreeze. Okay, so antifreeze is stuff you put in your car to keep your engine from freezing in the wintertime. Down here in Texas, we don't have that as many problems with that. But usually what happens is people will, in the springtime or summertime, they will empty the antifreeze out of their car into a pan. Well, it turns out antifreeze is very sweet. It's kind of a thick, syrupy kind of stuff, and it's sweet, and the dogs like to drink it. So we asked the owners, we said, has your dog been exposed to any kind of antifreeze? They said, oh my goodness, yes, we just changed our antifreeze. So we were able to treat the dog, right? We knew what was wrong with it by doing this urinalysis. We gave the dog all sorts of fluids and certain something you put in the stomach. It's like a charcoal thing to try to soak up any poisons that might be in there and something like that. Anyway, we were able to save the dog. Very cool. All right, so why do these form? And sometimes we'll look in there, and if I see white blood cells in there, then I know there might be an infection. They've crossed over into the filtrate, which is not supposed to be that way. If there's red blood cells, even if the urine doesn't look pink or bloody, sometimes red blood cells will be there in small amounts, and that does help us to diagnose some things. All right, so here's what happens. It goes into there, right, the proximal tubule, the loop of Henle, and we can see little casts that are forming here. We call those casts because they're kind of round shape like this. I can see some of these in the urine sometimes. They look like a little chunk, like a little tube, because it's been sitting in a tiny tube, right? And I can only see them under the microscope, yeah, because they're very, very small. And this is when I talked about the stones, right? So if there's just calcium kind of collecting up inside there, right here, if there's just this stone here, there might be trouble with these, obviously, getting the urine past. These can still function, however. Here, if it's just sitting right there, the urine can get past this. So while these might present as somewhat painful, this one would be very painful, okay? And then we go into that process of, going into the electro bath or something along those lines. Yeah, I'm sure they've come up with all sorts of treatments for this kind of thing. So what could be a cause of acute renal failure? Acute renal failure would be like total shutdown kind of a thing, right? So it could be damage in something like a car accident or something like that. We call that pre-renal. So in front of the kidneys, if there's a sudden severe drop in blood pressure, shock from a accident, from an internal bleeding, from an external bleeding, interruption to blood flow to the kidneys for some reason. It says here it could be some sort of severe illnesses. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but that would happen up here. So that therefore we can't even get to the process of filtration, right? The low blood pressure, that kind of thing. There could be damage to the kidneys themselves, okay? So if there is inflammation for some reason, that could be genetic, some sort of genetic disorder. There could be toxins or drugs that kind of rest in there and cause damage to the tissue itself. There could be damage, like I mentioned, the boxer, the kidney shot, getting punched in the back all the time during a bout in the ring, then that could cause kidney damage. That will present with hematuria, by the way, which means a bloody urine, because it just literally causes damage to the kidneys themselves. So that's intrarenal, inside the kidneys themselves. And then we have postrenal, so either the ureter or the bladder. We can have an obstruction. Remember I mentioned if they should drop and there should be a kink or something in there, or even a stone that's blocking it, right? If there's a stone right here, it blocks it completely. That urine will back up into that kidney and cause that kidney to get very large, and the kidney cannot function properly, right? And that could be a serious, serious problem right there. Or else down here we also have just right below the bladder for men, there's a gland, a prostate gland, which we'll learn about next time. And it can be very large, and it will keep the bladder from being able to empty the urine through the urethra, and the bladder gets really big, and possibly infection. If there's backwash basically from the urethra up into the bladder, there can be a bladder infection. Bladder infections are fairly common, more common in females because their urethra is shorter than a man's urethra, and therefore we can get infections that way. And they're pretty awful, and you can get those taken care of with a good antibiotic, etc. Now, if there is some kidney failure that is not, you're not able to fix it through, diet change or something like this, or some sort of treatment, antibiotic treatment or something, there is transplant. Turns out that kidney transplants are very effective. They're pretty common. I never really thought about it, but they do keep the kidney that's not functioning well. They'll keep it in there because it's functioning a little bit, presumably. If that kidney, for instance, had cancer, they would go ahead and remove it then. But if it's not cancerous, then they'll put the other one in here like this and just kind of tap in. That's pretty amazing, right? They just tap in like that, and they can have that increased ability. So it turns out that a living donor is a more effective transplant donor than a non-living. So a non-living deceased donor is somebody who dies, unexpectedly, and their organs are still in great shape, and they will be an organ donor. They can donate that. But a living donor is someone who happens to match you, and you might think, well, I only have 2 kidneys. I don't want to give one away. Truth is, you can function on one kidney beautifully, all right? In fact, if you have one kidney and it's functioning at about 35 to 40%, 30 to 40%, you will be fine. Okay, so therefore, if you have a family member who needs a kidney, go get tested, man. See if you can donate. It would be helpful to that person, because if their kidneys are not active, they have treatments, but I'm going to show you here, it's a lot of trouble. Okay, so if somebody's kidneys are not functioning properly, they can go through a process called kidney dialysis. And so what it is essentially is this poor man, see, he's sitting here, his blood is going to go out of his body into this machine. The machine's going to clean it up and take all the yucky stuff out and put his blood back into him. Oh my goodness, this is a laborious process. So this patient has to sit in this like 3 or even 4 times a week, go to get this done. Because remember, our kidneys are working 24/7, right? So his blood is not being filtered properly by his kidneys. Therefore, guess what? He's got toxins building up inside his body. And that's bad. That can poison us over time, And so this process takes several hours. So you can see that would kind of disrupt your life if you had to sit at this machine for 3 or 4 times a week and get your blood cleaned out like that. It's tough. But we have it. It's better than dying, right? So there is another option. It's called continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis, or CAPD, where you can walk around. Continuous means all the time, like our kidneys. Ambulatory, you're walking around. Peritoneal dialysis, what happens is we take a fluid that's a salty type fluid right into your peritoneal cavity, right into your abdomen, and then it will cause, through osmosis and things like this, cause the things like urea to be filtered into the specialized catheter right here. which is a patented catheter. It happens to be invented by a family member of mine, Dr. Jack Moncrief, and so he's kind of famous nephrologist. And then it sends that waste fluid into here, and you can empty that out. Now, that will be life altering as well, because you'll be walking around with these two, bags on you, but it is a little easier than sitting at the machine the whole time. Generally, these people, well, maybe not always, but often these people that are going through a process like that might be on a waiting list to get a kidney transplant. Okay, because they obviously have enough of a kidney problem that they can't do any of the much of the filtering on their own. Okay, so you want that kidney functioning, at least 30% of one kidney functioning well, in order to keep your blood nice and clean. Okay, so be good to your kidneys. How do we do that? Number one, drink plenty of water. Lots of water is going to keep them functioning well. It's going to keep your blood pressure at the right level. It's going to, and drink good water, water that doesn't have a lot of chlorine and stuff like that. And if you could filter the water, that'd be good. A healthy diet rich in fresh fruit and veggies. And sorry to preach, but I will say you probably want to go with organic. We want to keep away from the toxins that get put onto some of those. If you know that you have high blood pressure and or high cholesterol, you may want to deal with that. Some doctors might want to give you medications for that. There are some natural ways to go try to take care of that. Cholesterol is kind of an interesting topic right now. We're debating on how important it is and how bad it is, and it's really good for us, but we just want to be careful with that one. Good exercise regularly. That'll just keep your body and your muscles strong and the oxygen flowing. Limit caffeine. Caffeine is a diuretic, and a diuretic means that it's going to pull fluid out of your body. It's going to fake out your kidneys. Your kidneys are going to think you have enough water, but this chemical says, nope, we got to get rid of this. That's why you might notice if you've had 5 cups of coffee, you really need to use the bathroom often. That's because the coffee has caffeine. The caffeine is a diuretic, pulls the liquid into your bladder and into your urine, and you get actually a little dehydrated. So caffeine can actually dehydrate you somewhat. I do think I read an article recently that the caffeine effect of coffee isn't as bad as we thought, but there is the caffeine, heavy caffeinated things like those, what are they called? Sports drinks, not sport drinks, the super drinks, whatever they are. They're bad for you. I don't like them. Smoking has absolutely no benefit to you whatsoever, none, zero. So don't do it. It's bad for your lungs. It's bad for your blood. It's bad for everything. Stay away from smoking. I'm a big smoking, the opposite of advocate. I don't like it at all. Okay, so don't smoke. All right, so supposedly these are foods that support healthy kidneys. So they look pretty good. Nutritionists are always changing their mind about things, so who knows what they'll say next time. But right now, these are some things that are supposedly good for you to keep your kidneys healthy, in addition to a ton of water, lots of water. Okay, so that's it. I hope you're impressed with the beautiful dynamic going inside your body without you even thinking about it. You've got those kidneys just working away all the time like that. And I hope you have nice, healthy kidneys. And I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Okay, I will talk to you next time, and we'll be covering our last module of the year, the dreaded Module 16. Thank you, students. See you soon.